It was a late afternoon, with the sun slowly setting and casting a soft golden glow over the busy streets of Riverdale. Marcus Carter, a black man with a calm demeanor, was driving his luxury car through the downtown area. He had just finished a long, tense day at the federal court, where he served as a judge. Dressed in a dark suit, Marcus usually didn't draw attention to himself. But today, he had no idea that he was about to become the center of a confrontation he hadn't anticipated. Behind him, a patrol car activated its lights and siren, signaling Marcus to pull over. He gently steered his car to the side of the road, feeling uneasy but trying to remain calm. The car window rolled down, cold air rushed in, and Marcus saw the white police officer step out. The officer was tall, with a stern expression and a cold, piercing look, as though he were eyeing a criminal. "Your car papers and driver's license," the officer said curtly. Marcus smiled politely and reached into the glove compartment for his documents. "Here are my papers, officer. Have I done something wrong? We received a report of a car similar to yours being involved in suspicious activity. Do you have an explanation?" Ryan Edwards, the officer, asked with a tone full of suspicion. Marcus furrowed his brow. "I don't think I've done anything illegal. I'm just driving home after work." Ryan took a deep breath, his gaze revealing his bias. "Get out of the car. I need to search your vehicle." Marcus could feel his anger rising, but he knew confronting him right now would only make things worse. He stepped out of the car, keeping his hands raised in a defensive stance. Ryan began searching the vehicle, opening the trunk and checking every compartment. Passers-by curiously stopped to watch, some even raising their phones to film. Ryan found nothing but still maintained his suspicious attitude. "Where are you from? What are you doing in this area? Who can prove you're not involved in something shady?" Marcus tried to keep his composure, but his voice had grown sharper. "I believe I have the right not to answer such offensive questions." Ryan frowned and took a step closer to Marcus. "The way you're responding isn't helping. You seem familiar with breaking the law, don't you?" "Officer, I'm not obligated to tolerate this kind of humiliation," Marcus said, his gaze sharp but still calm. Ryan's frustration grew. "You want to play smart, huh? Fine. I'll take you in for further questioning." Ryan handcuffed Marcus in front of the stunned onlookers. Some people began protesting, but Ryan ignored them. Marcus could feel the shameful stares and the whispers from the crowd. It wasn't the first time he had faced racism, but this situation had gone beyond anything he had encountered before. Ryan shoved Marcus into the back seat of the patrol car and locked the door. As the car rolled forward, Marcus looked out the window, a sense of bitterness and helplessness rising within him. He never imagined that, in the 21st century, he, a federal judge, would become the victim of prejudice and abuse of power. At the police station, Marcus was treated like a dangerous criminal. Ryan took notes for the report, but the reasons he cited were completely baseless. Drug possession, the excuse Ryan concocted after placing a small bag of white powder into one of the compartments in Marcus's car. Marcus remained silent, but his eyes burned with anger. He knew he was being set up, and he knew exactly what rights he had. However, reacting at this moment would only pull him deeper into Ryan's trap. The video documenting the entire incident between Marcus Carter and Ryan Edwards was uploaded online just hours after Marcus was taken to the police station. In the video, Marcus, a well-mannered, well-dressed man, is forced to stand against the car, while Officer Ryan Edwards displays an arrogant demeanor, insulting him with biased remarks. Statements like, "People like you are always involved in shady dealings," outraged viewers. Especially, Ryan's cold, contemptuous gaze became a symbol of the racist behavior within a decaying system. Within 12 hours, the video garnered millions of views and hundreds of thousands of shares. Social media platforms, from Twitter to Facebook, were flooded with hashtags like #JusticeForMarcus and #EndPoliceBias. Numerous human rights organizations spoke out, demanding that the Riverdale police be held accountable. Meanwhile, The black community and supporters of equality quickly organized protests, holding up signs calling for justice. At the Riverdale police station, Ryan Edwards felt the pressure mounting. His colleagues began eyeing him with suspicion, and some even distanced themselves from him. His supervisor called an urgent meeting, demanding a clear explanation of the incident. Ryan attempted to defend himself, claiming he was simply doing his job. But these justifications fell flat. Some colleagues who had worked with him began to speak out, recounting past instances where Ryan displayed racist attitudes during previous incidents. Ryan's family was also affected. His wife, Sarah, a high school teacher with progressive views, confronted him as soon as the video surfaced. "Ryan, what did you do? I don't even recognize you anymore," she said, her voice a mixture of anger and disappointment. Ryan angrily shot back, "I was just doing my job. Don't listen to the exaggerated stories on social media." But Sarah wasn't convinced. "No, Ryan, what you did was wrong, and you need to face it." Meanwhile, the media continued to cover the story extensively. Ryan was temporarily suspended while an investigation was underway. He began to feel the isolation, not just from the community but also from those closest to him. Marcus, after being released, returned to the quiet of his apartment. But the calm was only on the surface. His phone rang incessantly, with calls from colleagues, friends, and human rights organizations wanting interviews. His inbox was filled with messages of encouragement, but also threats from extremists. He turned off his phone and sat down on the couch, his eyes distant. Marcus felt torn in two. Part of him wanted to let everything pass and return to the quiet life of a judge. But the stronger part urged him to take action. This was not just his issue, but a community that had suffered for too long. Several human rights organizations reached out to Marcus, asking him to speak publicly. At first, he declined. He didn't want his personal story turned into a political tool. But after reading letters from strangers, thanking him for courageously confronting injustice, Marcus realized he had a responsibility to speak out. In a televised interview, Marcus appeared calm, but his eyes reflected determination. When the host asked him how he felt about the incident, Marcus replied, "I'm not the first to be treated this way, and sadly, I won't be the last. But I hope this story will be the first step in facing the prejudices that have been deeply ingrained in our system." The next day, Marcus returned to the courthouse, where he worked as one of the most respected federal judges in the city. His colleagues, from lawyers to administrative staff, greeted him with respect and sympathy. But Marcus noticed their gazes, a mix of admiration and curiosity. Although no one said it outright, everyone knew his story had become a national focal point. In his office, Marcus began digging deeper into Ryan Edwards. Using access to legal databases, he uncovered a series of questionable misconducts related to Ryan. Ryan had been involved in at least 4 instances of wrongful arrests in the past 2 years, all targeting black individuals. In each case, the victims were unable to prove their innocence due to lack of evidence or their inability to afford a competent lawyer. Some cases had been resolved internally with no punishment for Ryan. That evening, Marcus held a secret meeting at his home with a group of lawyers and human rights activists. He shared the information about Ryan and called for help in formulating a strategy to confront the abuse of power within the police force. "We can't let this happen again," Marcus said, his voice firm. "Ryan is just a small part of a larger system. If we don't act, who will?" The attendees nodded in agreement. A young lawyer named Angela, who had represented many victims of police violence, suggested forming a team to further investigate the entire Riverdale Police Department. Marcus agreed and pledged to use his influence to support the team. In the following days, Marcus spent time preparing an important speech he would deliver at a conference on judicial reform. He knew this event would be an opportunity for him to advocate for change. Not just for himself but for the community as a whole. "We need to do more than just punish people like Ryan Edwards," Marcus wrote in his speech. We need to change the way this system operates. We need a fair judiciary, where no one has to live in fear because of the color of their skin. Marcus knew that the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but as he looked into the mirror, he saw a man ready to fight, not just for himself, but for justice. Ryan Edwards woke up in the morning with a heavy heart. After being suspended, he felt completely isolated. His phone kept vibrating with calls from colleagues, but he didn't want to hear from anyone anymore. Some colleagues offered their support, but most were just reminding him of the mounting troubles. Ryan knew that he was becoming a negative face for the entire police department. At home, things were no better. His wife, Sarah, had grown increasingly distant. They ate breakfast in heavy silence, only the clinking of silverware against plates breaking the stillness. Finally, Sarah broke the silence. "Ryan, do you think you've gone too far?" she asked, her eyes full of disappointment. Ryan set his coffee cup down, staring at the table. "I was just doing my job, Sarah. You know I'm not a bad person. But what you did reflects something bad. Ryan, that video, it says it all," Sarah said, her voice trembling. Ryan didn't answer. He felt attacked from all sides, and this made him start doubting himself. Deep down, he knew that his actions weren't entirely right, but his ego and arrogance wouldn't allow him to admit it. Ryan recalled his childhood. He grew up in a conservative family in the suburbs, where racial prejudices against black people were passed down from one generation to the next. His father, a veteran, often said, "Always be wary of people with different skin color." Those words had etched themselves into Ryan's mind, becoming a part of his worldview. But Ryan also remembered another moment. When he was a teenager, a black friend at school had helped him escape from a bullying incident. The friend didn't ask questions, just stood up and defended him. It was the only time Ryan felt he truly owed someone of a different race. But that memory had been buried beneath years of prejudice and misguided teachings. Outside, Ryan's life continued to be disrupted. His neighbors began whispering and avoiding eye contact when they saw him. One evening, when Ryan went out to collect the mail, he saw a spray-painted red message on the wall of his house. "Racist." Sarah urged Ryan to call the police, but he refused. "I don't want any more trouble," he said, a mix of shame and anger rising within him. As Ryan struggled with the consequences, Marcus Carter quietly carried out his plan. Marcus knew that just his own case wouldn't be enough to change the entire system. He needed to find a more comprehensive approach to expose the flaws within the police force. Marcus began researching the history of the Riverdale Police Department. He discovered a troubling pattern. Lawsuits related to racial discrimination were often quashed through secret settlements, and officers involved in misconduct were rarely held accountable. Ryan's name appeared in multiple internal reports, but none of them led to legal consequences. Marcus decided to meet with some of Ryan's previous victims. He reached out to a human rights lawyer named Angela, who had represented several victims in similar lawsuits. Angela, a young but seasoned attorney, welcomed Marcus at her small office. Her desk was piled with documents, reports, and photos of victims. "Thank you for coming," Angela said, smiling. "I've been following your case, and I think this could be a great opportunity for us to change something." Marcus nodded. "I don't want this to just be a personal story. I want it to become a movement." Angela handed Marcus a stack of documents. "This is a list of Ryan Edwards' victims over the past few years. Some are willing to speak out, but they need assurances about their safety." Marcus glanced through the list, feeling a surge of anger. Each name represented a story, a life wounded by prejudice and abuse of power. Marcus and Angela began holding private meetings with Ryan's previous victims. They heard heartbreaking stories. A man beaten simply for failing to show identification, a woman interrogated harshly while driving with her young child, and a young man unlawfully detained for 3 days. Each story served as proof of the abuse of power and racial discrimination within the system. Marcus and Angela took careful notes. gathering evidence and testimonies from the victims. Angela suggested that Marcus reach out to a well-known journalist, someone who had previously written several exposés on police violence. Marcus agreed, and they provided the journalist with the documents. Within a week, the first article was published, exposing Ryan's misconduct and that of other officers in the Riverdale Police Department. The article sparked a new wave of outrage. Protests grew stronger, and pressure mounted on the police department's leadership. Marcus received interview requests from several TV stations, but he declined. He knew that real action would carry more weight than words. The largest protest took place on a weekend afternoon. Thousands of people from all walks of life gathered in the downtown Riverdale Square. They held up signs with slogans such as "Justice for All" and "End Police Violence." It wasn't just black people, but also white, Asian, and Latin people all united in one voice, creating a rare display of solidarity. Marcus didn't attend the protest, but he watched it on television. He felt a small glimmer of hope ignite within him. The chants from the crowd were not just expressions of anger, they were a call for change. Meanwhile, Ryan was at home, staring blankly at the television screen. The images of the protesters, their fury, made him feel guilty, but he still wasn't brave enough to admit his mistakes. The Riverdale Police Department finally couldn't withstand the pressure. They announced an indefinite suspension for Ryan and several other officers involved in the racial discrimination cases. An internal investigation was launched, but Marcus knew that this was just the first step. Marcus decided it was time for him to confront Ryan directly, not for revenge, but to force him to face the consequences of his actions. Marcus wanted to make Ryan an example, proof that change was possible, even for those who had once lost their way. At the Riverdale Police Department, the atmosphere was tense. The protest outside was not only the voice of the community, but also direct pressure bearing down on the entire force. In the meeting room, senior officers sat around a long table, their faces heavy with concern. Reports, complaints, and a mountain of questions from the media piled up in front of them. Ryan Edwards, who was currently suspended, sat at the end of the table. The confidence that had once been so apparent in him was now gone, replaced by a look of anxiety. He knew he was the center of all the criticism, but what surprised him was that those he had once considered allies were now silent or, worse, openly turning their backs on him. "Edwards," Lieutenant Mason said, his voice low but cold, "do you understand how your actions have made the entire police department a target?" Ryan swallowed hard, trying to stay calm. "I was just following protocol, Lieutenant. I didn't think it would escalate like this." Mason narrowed his eyes. "Protocol? Which protocol allows you to search someone's vehicle without evidence? Which protocol allows you to humiliate a citizen in public?" He slammed his hand on the table. "You've not only ruined your own reputation, but you've dragged us all into this mess." Ryan was speechless. He felt isolated. The colleagues who had once supported him now remained silent, as if afraid that any action in his defense would make them the next target. The meeting ended in heavy silence. Ryan left the room, feeling like the whole world was turning its back on him. The familiar hallways now felt strange. As he passed a group of younger officers, he overheard whispers and furtive glances. One of them quietly said, loud enough for him to hear, "That guy has ruined the whole police department." Ryan clenched his fists, feeling angry but not knowing where to direct his fury. While Ryan struggled with his isolation, Marcus Carter continued his fight. One day, he received notification that Ryan would appear in an internal hearing, and Marcus was invited to speak about the impact of Ryan's actions on the community. This would be the first opportunity for them to face each other since the incident on the street. Marcus entered the hearing room with calm composure, wearing his usual dark suit. Inside, Ryan was already seated at the defendant's table, his face clearly showing fatigue and tension. When their eyes met, Ryan immediately looked away, but Marcus held his sharp gaze. The hearing began with testimonies from witnesses. including Angela, the human rights lawyer, and several of Ryan's previous victims. They shared heartbreaking stories about how Ryan had abused his power. Each testimony was a knife to Ryan's honor, leaving him sitting in silence, unable to lift his head. When it was Marcus' turn to speak, the entire room fell silent. Marcus stood up, his eyes scanning the room. "Honorable members," he began, his voice deep and commanding. "What I went through is not just a personal issue. It is a clear manifestation of a system that has rotted from the inside. A system where power is used to oppress rather than protect." Marcus looked directly at Ryan, his gaze unwavering. "I do not intend to ruin anyone's life, but I cannot remain silent when actions like this continue. We must face the truth that, if we do not change, how many more victims will have to endure the same injustices?" Marcus' words were like sharp arrows, piercing directly into Ryan's pride. He sat there, frozen, unable to respond. After the hearing, Ryan was officially charged with abuse of power and indefinitely suspended from his duties. The news of this decision quickly spread, becoming the focal point of media outlets. Some supported the decision, seeing it as a step forward in police reform, while others criticized it, claiming Ryan was merely a scapegoat for larger systemic issues. Ryan returned home physically and emotionally exhausted. He sat at his desk, staring at the suspension notice. In his mind, memories of his career flooded back, from the early days filled with passion, to the present, when he had become a symbol of the system's failure. Sarah, his wife, entered the room, carrying a cup of tea. She placed the cup on the table and sat next to him. "Ryan," she said softly, "it's time for you to face the truth." Ryan sighed. "I've ruined everything, haven't I?" Sarah nodded, but her gaze was gentle. "You made a mistake, but a mistake doesn't define who you are. What's important is what you'll do from here." Ryan remained silent, but Sarah's words began to sink deeply into his mind. He realized that, in order to make amends, he had to take action. Ryan began to undergo a profound inner struggle. He spent many sleepless nights, questioning how he could make amends for his mistakes. He read books about the history of racism, trying to understand the prejudices that had shaped his thoughts and actions. One day, Ryan decided to do something he never thought he would. He wrote an apology letter to Marcus. In the letter, he admitted his mistakes, not only in the incident with Marcus but throughout his entire career. He wrote, "I cannot change what has happened, but I can commit to ensuring it doesn't continue. I am willing to work with you, or anyone, to improve the system that I once helped harm." After finishing the letter, Ryan felt a weight lift off his shoulders. But he knew this was just the first step. He had to prove it through his actions. Meanwhile, Marcus received the letter from Ryan. At first, he was skeptical of Ryan's sincerity, but as he read each word carefully, he sensed genuine remorse. Marcus pondered whether to give Ryan a chance to make amends, not just for their own benefit, but for the community. Marcus knew that the fight was far from over, but he also understood that, sometimes, change begins in the most unexpected places. One early morning, Marcus Carter sat in his home office, the soft light of dawn streaming through the window. The letter from Ryan Edwards lay in front of him. The words in the letter, though full of remorse, still left Marcus feeling conflicted. As a judge, he was accustomed to evaluating everything based on evidence and actions, not words. But this time, what troubled him wasn't just the letter, but the memories from the past that this situation brought to the surface. Marcus closed his eyes, and images from his childhood flooded his mind. He remembered his father, a strong and resilient black man who worked tirelessly at a steel factory in the suburbs to provide for the family. His father often spoke about the times he faced discrimination, from being denied a raise to enduring insulting remarks from coworkers. One time, when Marcus was a child, his father was stopped by the police for no reason while driving home, despite having done nothing wrong. just because he was a black man driving an old car. He was humiliated and made to wait for hours by the side of the road. Marcus vividly recalled the look in his father's eyes when he returned home that day, eyes filled with helplessness but also quiet resolve. "Son, this world isn't fair. But you can't let that injustice define you," his father had said. Those words had become a guiding principle for Marcus throughout his life. But now, as he faced the apology letter from Ryan, he realized that injustice didn't just come from the system, but from the individuals within it. If people like Ryan truly wanted to change, should Marcus give them the chance? Marcus decided not to respond immediately to Ryan's letter. Instead, he focused on a larger plan, one for reforming the police and judicial system that he had been quietly preparing for a long time. Marcus organized a major seminar at a prestigious university, where legal experts, human rights activists, and even police officers were invited to attend. On the day of the seminar, the auditorium was packed. The stage lights illuminated the speaking area as Marcus stepped up with calm yet authoritative poise. He began his speech with a question that silenced the entire room. How many of us here have witnessed injustice and done nothing about it? He paused, scanning the crowd. Our silence, our indifference, are the very bricks that build the wall of discrimination we are trying to tear down. Marcus presented a detailed plan, which included establishing an independent oversight committee to investigate police misconduct, enhancing training on unconscious bias, and implementing stricter regulations for handling officers who abuse their power. He emphasized that this was not an attack on the police force but an effort to rebuild trust between law enforcement and the community. When the speech ended, the entire audience stood and applauded. But Marcus knew that applause was just the first step. What truly mattered was action. Ryan Edwards watched the seminar on television. He was struck by Marcus's words. Each sentence, each point seemed to pierce his heart, making him realize that his mistakes were not only in his actions but also in his thinking. He decided he could no longer sit idly by. Ryan reached out to several local human rights organizations, expressing his willingness to attend workshops on bias and improving police-community relations. First, his presence was met with strong opposition. Many did not want to listen to a former officer who had abused his power. But Ryan did not give up. He listened to the stories, took in the criticisms, and began to understand the damage caused by him and others like him. One day, Ryan decided to send another letter to Marcus. This time, he not only apologized but also requested a face-to-face meeting. He wrote, "I don't expect you to forgive me, but I want to show you that I am trying to change. I want to work with you to fix what has been broken." Marcus read the letter, and after several days of contemplation, he agreed to meet Ryan. The meeting took place at a small cafe. Marcus walked in and saw Ryan waiting, his face clearly tense. As Marcus sat down, Ryan immediately spoke. "I thank you for giving me this opportunity," Ryan said, his voice full of emotion. "I know I have caused a lot of harm, and I don't expect you to forgive me easily. But I want to do something to make amends." Marcus looked directly at Ryan. "Forgiveness is not something I can give right now, but if you truly want to change, you will have to prove it through your actions." Ryan nodded. "That's what I intend to do, and I want to start by supporting your reform plan." Marcus didn't answer immediately. He took a sip of coffee, thinking. Finally, he spoke. "I will give you a chance, but remember, this is not about you or me. It's about the community, about the people whom this system has hurt." Marcus and Ryan began working together on reform projects. Initially, their relationship was fraught with tension. Marcus remained cautious. While Ryan faced skepticism from both sides, his former colleagues saw him as a traitor, and the community was not quick to forget his past mistakes. One of their first projects was to organize educational workshops in high schools, where they discussed bias, fairness, and personal responsibility. During one of the workshops, Ryan stood before a group of black students and shared his story. He admitted his mistakes, explained how prejudice had influenced his thinking, and urged the students not to let hatred overpower their faith in change. Marcus stood quietly in the back, observing. He saw the sincerity in Ryan's words and realized that, while Ryan's journey of atonement was far from over, he was heading in the right direction. Gradually, their collaboration began to yield results. Social organizations, donors, and even some progressive police officers began supporting the reform plan. While many challenges remained, both Marcus and Ryan sensed one thing. Real change begins when people are willing to confront the past and work together to build a better future. One spring morning, the soft sunlight bathed the town square in Riverdale. Hundreds of people gathered for the first public event of the reform campaign led by Marcus Carter and Ryan Edwards. The atmosphere was lively, with booths from social organizations, open discussion forums, and banners calling for unity between the police and the community. Marcus took the stage, dressed in a simple yet neat suit. The crowd fell silent as he took the microphone. His voice rang out powerfully, each word carved from determination and belief. Today, we are not just gathering to protest injustice. We are here to build a future where justice is no longer a privilege but a fundamental right for everyone. The applause erupted, but Marcus raised his hand to signal for silence. As if wanting the crowd to pause, he continued, his gaze sweeping over the crowd. To do this, we must face the truth not only about the system but about ourselves. We must dismantle the prejudices deeply ingrained in our minds and replace them with understanding and compassion. Marcus invited Ryan onto the stage. The crowd murmured, some showing signs of discontent. Ryan stepped up, his demeanor confident but his face slightly tense. He knew he had to face the skepticism. "Hello," Ryan began, his voice firm. "I am Ryan Edwards, a former police officer, and I was wrong." The entire square fell silent. Ryan took a deep breath and continued. "I abused my power. I allowed prejudice and fear to guide my actions, and those actions caused suffering, not only for the people I encountered but for this community. Today, I'm not standing here to ask for forgiveness. I'm standing here to say that I am committed to righting my wrongs." Scattered applause began, growing louder. Ryan felt a slight sense of relief. This was not complete forgiveness, but it was a start. As the reform campaign began to gain momentum, an unexpected incident occurred. A 17-year-old black youth named Jamal was shot and killed by another officer in the Riverdale Police Department during a confrontation. The incident sparked outrage throughout the city, shattering the efforts that Marcus and Ryan had worked so hard to build. Marcus received the news about the incident while preparing for a workshop. The news hit him like a punch to the gut. He felt anger, not just toward the system but also toward himself for not moving fast enough to prevent tragedies like this. Ryan also received the news and felt guilty. He knew he was no longer an officer, but this event reminded him of the mistakes he had made in the past. He immediately called Marcus. "We can't let this destroy everything," Ryan said over the phone, his voice shaking. "No, we can't," Marcus replied. "But we have to act right now." They decided to hold a press conference the very next day to express their sympathy for the victim's family and call for an independent investigation. At the press conference, Marcus spoke first. "Jamal should not have died. We cannot continue to lose any more lives due to abuse of power and prejudice," he said, his voice echoing in the silence of the room filled with reporters. Ryan stepped up next. "I know some people will doubt my presence here, but let me be clear. I support every effort to hold those responsible accountable. No one, not even police officers, should be above the law." The press conference created a new wave of support. But Marcus and Ryan knew that this incident had made their work much more difficult. After Jamal's incident, Marcus and Ryan focused on mending the rifts. They organized open discussions involving both the community and the police force. At first, these meetings were filled with tension, with accusations and criticisms exchanged. But Marcus and Ryan, with patience and sincerity, gradually eased the situation. During one of the discussions, Jamal's mother stood up to speak. Her voice trembled but was firm. I lost my son, but I don't want any other mother to go through this pain. We have to change. Her words brought silence to the room. A young officer, who had been in the force for just a few years, stood up and responded. We need to do better. I want to apologize for what happened, and I want to commit to doing everything I can to make things better. Those words marked a turning point. The discussions that followed became more constructive. The community began to see that, despite the many differences, they could work together to bring about change. Months later, a police reform bill was passed in the city of Riverdale. The bill included the establishment of an independent oversight committee, improved recruitment and training processes for officers, and the implementation of surveillance technologies to ensure transparency. Marcus and Ryan stood side by side on the steps of City Hall, watching the cheering crowd. They knew this was just a small step in a long journey, but it was a step in the right direction. Ryan turned to Marcus. I owe you a lot, he said. Marcus smiled. You owe this community. Keep working to make things right. Ryan nodded, his eyes filled with determination. He knew that his journey to make amends would last a lifetime. But now he was ready. As Marcus stepped up to the microphone to speak, he felt a new sense of hope. We've shown that change is possible, but it only happens when we stand together and never give up. The crowd applauded, cheers echoing across the square. Marcus felt a burden lifted, but he knew the battle was far from over, and that was something he was ready to accept for justice, for the future, and for all those like him who had suffered injustice.